So the number one tank that's been requested in the comments is the T28 T95. Today we're going to cover some of its development history and go over where the tank is today. As always, the sources for this video are down in the description below and listed at the end. Some of my folks from World of Tanks know this tank is the T95. We're going to cover the confusing name switch as part of this video as well. So, the story of this broad and beautiful behemoth begins in 1943, when the Ordnance Department here in the US decided that a heavy vehicle able to penetrate deep into expected German fortifications would be required for the proposed invasion of Europe. Due to what was experienced in World War I, it was hypothesized that once the Hun was on the retreat, he would begin to prepare extensive and in-depth defensive lines such as the Siegfried Line. These fortifications had in fact begun in the 1930s as a sort of counter to the French Maginot Line. They stretched from the border of the Netherlands along the German border down to Switzerland, and featured more than 18,000 bunkers, tunnels, and tank traps. Intelligence had shown that once again, these were slowly being rebuilt and repaired, and the Allies knew that conventional tanks would have great difficulty in overcoming these obstacles, and heavy losses would ensue. Thus, the requirement was placed to have a T5E1 105mm gun, and armor of at least 8 inches thick. The gun was chosen for its decent dual-purpose characteristics of being an effective anti-tank system, and its ability to penetrate deeply into concrete structures. Something else called for at the time would be utilizing the hybrid petrol-electric drive from the T1E1, part of the experimental M6 heavy tank family. Why use an electric motor in a tank? This was due to a property of electric motors. While expensive and impractical during the war for mass production, the electric motor produced phenomenal torque, second only to steam. This was required to propel such a heavy vehicle. 25 of these new machines were proposed by the Chief of Ordnance to be built within a wild deadline of just 12 months to be ready for the invasion of Europe. This ambitious project was curtailed to just 3 prototypes, to be made by the Army Ground Forces, who also preferred a cheaper mechanical transmission over the more effective but more costly electrical system. In March 1944, just a few months before the proposed Allied invasion, Army Service Forces would issue a requirement for 5 machines with even heavier armor of 12 inches to the front, designated Super Heavy Tank T28. It would be in the 95-ton range. The design specs were considerably simplified. Such a machine didn't have to rely on speed or mobility, and due to the siege aspect of its role, a turret wouldn't be required either, so the design could be in a casemated configuration. This would allow the designers more leeway on where the armor could be placed, as well as making tasks like center of gravity configurations a lot easier. The result was a large and wide, chunky behemoth designed to approach under heavy fire and slowly tear apart anything in its way while weathering anything that could be thrown back at it. The British had already been working on their own similar concept since 1942 in the form of the Tortoise class vehicles. Despite design work moving forward at a good pace, it was clear to those involved that it was not going to be built in time to see action in the Allied landings, and it soon became apparent that it wouldn't actually be needed either way. With Germany getting beaten back over on the Eastern Front, the Western Front was crumbling fast, and the Allies were racing up through Italy. Patton's tactics of simply bypassing the Germans was working, and large pockets of resistance were being crushed or simply ignored as the Allied forces swept over or around them. Much like the British Tortoise, the need for such a vehicle was now of a low priority, and the design was passed to the Pacific Car and Foundry Company in May of 1945. The first cast segments were ready in June, and the first complete hull was ready by August 1945. But by September 1945, and the war was over, Japan had capitulated and any need for overweight, super heavy vehicles was no longer needed. So, while the development of armored vehicle had leapt ahead in the last 3 years, this means such things like the T95 were an awkward testimony to older thought and design. But yet the program proceeded, and a small batch was built for other purposes. The T95 was thus limited to just 2 pilots. The first was shipped to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in December 1945, and the second in January 1946. The first was used for engineering tests, and the second to Fort Knox and later Yuma for flotation testing. The same fate also occurred to the Tortoise in the UK. Both the US and the UK saw no combat use for such machines, but both realized they could provide a useful testing platform for the next generation of heavy tanks. The Tortoise was used in Germany to test roads, bridges, and fording, while the T95 was used in the US to test heavy transporter and towing equipment. By 1947, the US had abandoned the idea of super heavy tanks, sticking to just light, medium, and heavy, and anything in the 100-ton region was considered pointless. Besides, they'd been able to mount similar and even larger guns on turreted vehicles in the form of the T29 and T30. So, what's in a name? In February 1945, the proposed vehicle was to be redesignated from T28 Super Heavy Tank to 105mm gun motor carriage T95, as under US classifications of the time it was not a tank. It lacked a fully rotating turret, and it couldn't engage secondary targets reliably, thus it required support. This new name, T95, was officially passed on the 9th of March, 1945, yet the first hole hadn't even been cast. Still, the classification did not sit easily with the US forces, as it was neither a tank nor a gun motor carriage by their own definition, and so once again, in June 1946, the vehicle was once again renamed by the US Army as Super Heavy Tank T28. One common myth is that the designation T28 and T95 are describing different vehicles, identified by the presence of the outer tracks, but these are actually intentionally designed as removable for ease of transport, so the T28 and the T95 are the same tank. This T95 is the last survivor of the program, and it rests at the National Armor and Cavalry Collection at Fort Benning in Georgia, here in the USA. It sits with a fresh coat of paint and is awaiting transport to the new TSF facility slated for completion in mid-2020. This particular tank is also well known for its stealth capabilities. After being lost after testing, it was recovered in the mid-1970s in a field in Virginia. In addition to apparently being able to go invisible, this tank can also fly. When it was being transported across post at Fort Benning from the storage facility over to where it was going to wait to be painted, there was a brake failure on the heavy equipment transporter, and this tank slid off of the trailer and into a ditch. There was minimal damage, but you could see the tank really just wanted to be free. It's been repaired since, and rests here with both tracks firmly on the ground and in plain sight since. It still has the outer tracks. At the time of filming, these two received fresh paint and are a little ways down the yard. They'll be placed back on the vehicle when it's finally moved to display. Sources for this video include Hunnicutt's published work, Firepower, a visual examination at Fort Benning, OCM reports, record files labeled Tortoise at the Bovington Tank Museum Archives, and R.P. Hunnicutt Notes on Material Heavy Tank 28 from the archives at Fort Benning from NACC. If you would like to see this tank in greater detail, I have a walk-around of it uploaded from last year, and I would like to thank both historian Ed Francis and curator Rob Kogan for the assistance in compiling material here for this video. It's an awesome tank, and it was amazing to be able to meet in real life. The gun mantlet is like thicker than my entire body, it's crazy. So what tank do you guys want to see next? Let me know down in the comments, like and subscribe for more tanks, and I will see you next time.